these tips, you can rack them up and kind of audit your own website and be like, okay, is there enough here where I can change some things? Enough here that I'm doing right where I can just change a few things and it'll be good? Or should I start from square one? And if you should start from square one, I want you to know, like, don't be worried about that, because
you are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to Creative Juice. With me is Corinne for the first time. It's just me and Corinne for the first time in a while. There was me and Jack for quite some time during copywriting month, and then we had you back for one episode, and then we did the team episode, right?
Yeah. Yay! I'm happy to be back. So
well,
I'm gonna
be back in the regular format.
Seriously, it's funny because like as Cirque and I were getting set up for this episode, I was like, wait, I need to record audio. Oh, am I doing video? Like it's like I forgot how to do this. You know, it's been like 6 weeks, man.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's been a while. Yeah.
I'm back into the swing of things. I'm happy to be here.
Well, it is officially Artist Website Month here at Entrepreneur. And last episode, we had the whole team on to talk about kind of what an artist website needs, like what we think are need-to-haves for any good artist website, and the platform that you build that website with. And today we want to talk about why your artist website sucks.
We're so rude, man. I think it's the tough love though that really makes it like, hopefully you love us for it. We love you. We love you guys. But yeah, I mean,
I'm not saying that you suck. I'm saying your artist website probably
right.
sucks.
That's a totally different problem. Yeah. No, I think that's one thing too, is that there's a lot of, we typically, when we do a lot of things, right, we're looking for inspiration from the people who are supposedly the ones who made it and are doing it right, and so, and then if you are like, no, I understand, Entrepreneur, you say to look at digital marketer site, and then you go there and you're like, but there's no music here. I think some people might have a little bit of difficulty trying to figure out like, all right, so what am I, what am I really shooting for here? Can I like swipe some people? Can I trust anything I'm seeing online to like try to imitate it and, learn by doing kind of thing? And, I think that's just tough. Like, so hopefully we can like highlight some things that make artist websites suck and then highlight some things that make them awesome. Yeah. And you can kind of use inspiration, but also like set a new standard, because I think the majority of artist websites out there aren't holding to a standard that they really need to be a functioning website.
Yeah, I'd also like to say that a majority of this list was sourced from the time I spent auditing major label artist websites. So like a majority of the things I have on the list for us to talk about today are not from indies.
Right.
I don't think indies, the websites that we see have design challenges.
Right.
But the artist websites that we see from the majors have like structural, deep, fundamental misunderstandings at the root of before they were even started to be built.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too, because I think like a lot of websites on the web period are kind of crappy, right? For very similar and some very different reasons. And it's just kind of funny because it's like the internet has existed for all this time, and there's, however many web builders out there. There's a million ways to get your presence on the internet, and maybe that's part of the problem, right? Is that it's so easy to put up a website that we've lost sight of what the good things are, and what your site should be doing, So, let's unpack that, sir. Let's get into it.
Yeah. So, I kind of did this out in logical order in terms of we're going to first talk about like just scanning down your homepage. What are the common issues? So starting with the header, talking about above the fold, and then just talking about unnecessary content or prioritization of goals in the rest of the home pages we see. And then we're going to talk about some like site-wide issues that we commonly see. But the number one reason I would say that your website sucks. I just think it's funny to say it as yours. The number one reason that we see artist websites sucking is at the header level is that they have a gigantic image of the band that takes up almost all of the real estate upon page load. When you get to an artist website, you're presented with this like huge visual if you judge by, and so one thing that we're going to say a lot in this episode is visual hierarchy, meaning, where are the eyes drawn first? Hierarchy matters on a website. And this is how web designers and UX designers think about it, is like, what is the number one important thing that someone should see on your website? Great. That's number one in the visual hierarchy. And for most artist websites, it's like a picture of the band.
Yeah. It's like people think, oh, you don't know where you are, so let me give you a giant photo of my face or of me sweating on stage, or, it's like you couldn't make a clearer you are here button, right? And it's like, here's the thing, guy. Right. They already got there from somewhere else. Like they either Googled you, right? Or they clicked a link on your stuff. There's no way that they were just, oh, I'm cruising around online shopping Amazon and bam, there's your site. And like, oh, who is that? Oh, good. There's a good big picture there, so I know where I am. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a very unnecessary thing. And it's funny because this is, again, one of those things, I talk about this all the time, where something else in my life helped me make the right decision, even though I didn't do it on purpose. Like, I'm taking no credit for being smart. It's just that's how life happened and it helped me. But like, I've been uncomfortable with having my face on things, especially as spokesperson for the Army. Like, my face was like I'm talking like from an inch below my chin to the top of my head, 12 feet tall on the back of a semi, which is terrible design in the first place.
Right.
And I didn't do that. I don't take credit for that. But like, and I was like, wow, that's so unnecessary. Like, that gives you no context except that there's a billboard of your face. And I know people get very excited. Like, if their face were in Times Square, they'd be super stoked, right? But, it's so whether or not you love your face on things, right? It's better practice to have something they can do, because a giant photo of you on one page, let alone all the pages, right, is just, it sucks, man. Nobody needs it.
Yeah. And I think it's easy to take this cynically, but what I'm specifically pointing out, and I think what we're trying to say is that obviously people aren't lost, right? And they don't need to see your face. Like, we're not saying you don't know that, but it's important when you introduce a hierarchy to it, then you have to get really serious about what is absolutely necessary.
Right.
And so we're pointing out the silliness of how unnecessary that element of the website is. Mm-hmm. And it's not to make fun of anyone. It's to literally say, look, that's the least important thing.
Right.
Is for them to recognize your band or to see some flashy image of your band.
Right.
And big images are a common theme when it comes to what sucks about most artist websites, is gigantic images of the band that just don't need to be there.
Right. Well, and they can affect load time too, right? But I think, and some of
100%.
even our indies get confused because we're like, you don't need to have these giant photos of yourself. And at that point, recognition isn't important. But that's because, like we were talking about last week, people who go to your site, they're already kind of elevated, right? They're not in the beginning pieces of the buddy system. They're later on. They wouldn't even really be on your site otherwise, right? Unless you were mentioned by Jimmy Fallon, maybe then, okay? But until then, right? They're already kind of warmer. So that's different from when we talk about if you're running a fan finder and you're running an opt-in campaign beyond beyond that, they do need to recognize your face there. But once they make it to your site, they already know your face, right? So I think that's where some people get a disconnect as well. They're like, well, aren't I supposed to have them recognize me? And it's like, well, by the time they get to your site, they already know who you are, or they wouldn't be there.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's a pretty common thing to misunderstand in terms of, kind of how the web works, because websites aren't really a thing that people use a whole lot anymore. Outside of a handful of websites that you go to every day, Facebook.com, YouTube, and which are now appified. So they're apps on your phone. you really don't visit a whole lot of websites anymore. And if you do, you're not the norm.
Right.
And so because a website is so much less common these days in terms of like something that people spend a whole lot of time on, then like you have to assume that if someone ends up on your website, that it's rare, that there's a reason, that they know you already.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're looking for information, which is really, and as we get further into things that suck, we're going to be highlighting things that are not giving those visitors the information that probably caused them to end up on your site in the first place, right? Like the site's there with a purpose. And I think, a lot of the things we're going to identify beyond this huge photo, right? We've got a few other things on our list. And most of it is because it's not providing information to the people who ended up on the site, right? It's a bunch of auxiliary things that they're not going to use. So, let's kind of highlight that, right? Your website should be doing something. Then it'll suck less automatically.
And continuing in that vein is the near ubiquitous use of social media links in headers. Aside from big unnecessary images or headers that are just too tall, they don't need to be any bigger than I think like 50 pixels. And we just see in every header, there's always links back to the artist's social. And it's like, it just falls right into the same category of like, that's not why someone came here, and they don't need that right now, probably.
Right. It's funny. This is a little off topic, but today I got an email from an artist that I love, and they were like sending me an email to say, follow on Instagram for the latest photos.
Yeah.
I was like, really? You're sending me an email about Instagram? Like, this seems so backwards. But that's how I feel about a lot of sites, too, where it's like, oh, awesome. Like, I got your Facebook link, and I just came here from there. So tight. I'm just in this perpetual cycle of not knowing where to go. So, it's definitely, it's a shame, too, because it's like there's so many things that could be happening in that space instead.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, that's not to say that like, yeah, maybe like your social should be on your website, but like definitely not it's not high up in the visual hierarchy, because the presumption is that if they came to your website, they originated on social. Like that's the discovery methods for entertainment these days. So, and Spotify is kind of in there too, but we'll talk about that. But so yeah, social links, big images.
Website on Spotify.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, at this point, like a lot of the artist websites that we end up seeing are like, they're not like crazy big careers, but even with a crazy big career, oftentimes you have a singular focus that you can boil your website down to, which is like sell the latest record and merchandise associated with it, or sell the tour that you're on. Like that's certainly true for most of the major artists that are out right now, is like you could just remove the visual header altogether, like, because you probably don't need your menu, and if you do, you probably don't need it at the top of your homepage. Right. So speaking specifically about your homepage, like you probably don't need the menu either.
Yeah. I mean, and that's why I think, when I look at a lot of builders and I see these like one pager roll downs, I'm like, it's almost like those templates were built with the understanding of what your website should be doing. But then like artists ruin it by not doing that, right? By not keeping, because in theory, it kind of like takes you out of the need of a menu, because you're going to serve up like, these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 top things you need to know. And if you need something more than that, then at the bottom, there's a menu for you, But chances are, this layout is going to tell you the stuff that you are looking for if you're here, which is generally going to be like Cirque says, merchandise, tour dates, whatever,
right.
Or an opt-in campaign, that kind of thing.
Well, you really have to get to this like the psychology of like who's on your homepage, and you have to know all the ways someone might end up on your homepage specifically.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's, the other thing too, and that's why we advocate for websites that have landing pages, right? So that if you're running ads, like there's a specific message for them. So, you would like like I said last week, the top thing on a website to support whatever thing you're pouring money into right now, because it just amps up the efforts of something that you're investing in if you have a very specific campaign happening. But otherwise, like you could be running multiple different campaigns and having those on their own pages so that people do what's expected. So in the same way, your site shouldn't not expect to do something when people get there. It should have kind of the same idea as a landing page, except it's more broad across multiple things in your artistry.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, like I really want people to consider that. Like it's there's so many reasons why menus aren't as necessary as they were in like the 2000 to 2010 period. Like you kind of needed a menu to get around a website. And like certainly in the big websites like YouTube and Facebook and like Netflix, like you need these menus and these app websites. But these days, if I search you on Google and you're doing anything right with SEO or you're using any kind of like good website builder, all of your menu, content, the other pages, they're listed in your Google result. And so
right.
I could have done that then, and I probably have ascertained like these are the things you offer on your website. Further, if I'm coming from your website, I'm probably not gonna. If I'm coming from your social, chances are I'm not ending up on the homepage. Like you're probably deep linking me somewhere in your website. So the scenarios in which I would end up on your homepage are very rare. Either I'm already on your website and I clicked to see what the homepage was like, and that people do that for a very specific reason, or I Googled you and intentionally clicked your homepage, or I typed your website in and I've memorized it. Either way, I'm pretty warm. Like it was not easy to get to your homepage specifically, and I went there. And so you really want to think about that and think like, does this person need a menu off rip, or do they need to see something that's special and for them and advantageous to my business? So aside from all these other header issues we've talked about, not the least of which is big images and social links, I would say like maybe you want to consider throwing your header out entirely from a visual standpoint.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that there's, the best way to do a header right isn't very pretty, and yeah. And if anything, it does more of the thing that we don't like that websites do, which is allow people to get kind of lost and know where to go. And when there's too many choices, people leave. We've talked about that before with sales offers, but the same thing is true when they're on your site. Now, some people might click around and peruse and whatever, and that isn't like totally unheard of, and we want people to do that, but they're probably going to do that more if what's on the page is of substance and not things that they completely expect, like your Spotify link and a playlist embedded there and your YouTube video that they've already seen, et cetera, right? Yeah. Like they're going to fall deeper into your world if the website is like doing something complex that kind of sucks them in, If they see what they already know is there, they're probably going to be like, yeah, I know what this is, and close out and move on with their life.
Yeah. And I mean, from a business perspective, and we're kind of moving into the above the fold version, like a part of your homepage, which is, if there is a header, anything below the header, but above the part where I have to scroll to see it when your page loads, that's above the fold. Above the fold meaning above the part where I have to scroll to see. And that's sacred territory because of the rarity of someone ending up there. And it's largely thought now, like back in the older days of SEO, even as early as like 3-4 years ago, the thought was like content marketing. Have like epic content on your website that people go to and share, and your website will climb in the search rankings. And these days, that's kind of like, that helps as a long-term strategy. It's dope. But the most successful web pages are landing pages. So the more that your homepage is like a landing page, the more successful it's going to be. Some of the most successful websites, like monetarily, have been just a headline and a button, or,
Right.
an opt-in form. And the headline was a very compelling offer. And that's all it needs to be, because you can communicate with them through email. You can build that relationship. If they need information, they can go back to your website. They're adults,
Right. They're grown-ups. They know how this works. Yeah. I mean, I think that that's something that we just take for granted, and again, it's not necessarily that everyone who's putting together their site is like, you're missing out on these things because you're a dum-dum. Like, it's just not something that we apply when we're designing. So that's why we're talking about it, is it's like, these are the things that you should kind of understand when you're putting this together. Again, like we spoke about last week, templates can kind of sway you the wrong way, because a lot of templates aren't set up this way either. Or if they are, they feel very corporate. So by the time you make it feel more like a creative type of space, then it doesn't have the same functionality in it anymore, because it's different, So a lot of people just don't know how to combine these things. But I think it definitely, like when I'm talking to the founders over the past couple of weeks, Indie Founder's been running, and we're in week 4 now, week 3. Yeah, we're in what day is it? We're in week 3 now. And something that we talk about is like, okay, in the buddy system, what components of your site and components of your, different pieces in your site or on your, Facebook page, on your IG profile, what kind of support are you getting for the different phases of your buddy system? And then how does that link to events on your pixel and stuff like that? And I think a lot of them are starting to realize like, oh, like my site should be supporting these things that I'm like working so hard to do via email. I'm working so hard to do with my content. My website should be supporting that. And it's like, yes, you got it, So I think, you just don't know this stuff until you start being purposeful about it and applying it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like, this isn't to demean anyone. Like, I built horrible websites in the past,
Dude,
and this is only stuff that I've learned over the last, like, maybe 4 years,
Yeah.
So I think, like, the obviousness of it, once explained to me, seems like comically obvious, but it wasn't always that way for me. And yeah, like, continuing in that vein, you're above the fold does not need big images or social links. It doesn't need them. Like, sometimes images help above the fold, but like oftentimes only like heavily distorted. So like maybe there's like an entire blue layer over an image with the opacity like turned down a little bit so you can see the image, but it's all cast in blue.
Yeah.
And then there's the headline and the button, and
Right.
that's like, like that's all the image you need. Anything else is kind of cheesy. Like, it's easy to get cheesy once you start bringing in images, and they take time to load.
Yeah.
So like, you don't necessarily, especially if it's difficult to make this image look good, you don't need an image. Especially if you've got your branding down, you can convey your brand with fonts and colors, and that's your kind of your character. So I invite people to consider that they don't need the big image or social links above the fold either, but they do need an offer. And if there's no offer in the first thing that I see on your website that might get me to a more advantageous stage of relationship with you, then you're losing out.
Right. And I think that's something that, again, is something that we just don't consider very often. I don't know. I feel like we're just kind of listing off the things that like nobody's really thought about with their site before, or maybe they know, but like imagery is really, for me, like, I don't need to look at a photo album, like, of photos of your people, like photos of the band, photos of performance, like those don't really supply me with information about who you guys are, what you do, whatever. So like, I think that photos are really an opportunity to add texture, right? And kind of speak to your brand, but in a very subdued kind of way. So like Sirk's saying, where there's like an overlay to it, or, like the opacity is very light, so that your brand is like communicating, but definitely not distracting from the thing you want them to do, because they can't do anything from a photo, but they can do something from whatever you put on top of it, right? So, I think that that's one way that you can integrate images without it being, too self-indulgent or, feeling like you're just using like a standard gradient, right? Because those are kind of boring. Instead, use images for, an overlay, or, it'd be an underlay, right, of the text. Or if it's too busy, add a color filter over it and make it really subdued, because I think otherwise images just don't help your cause enough.
Yeah, I mean, your main business goal can only be supported by your website insofar as your website places a primacy in a hierarchical primacy, if you will, on an offer that supports that main business goal. Mm-hmm. That should be the first thing. And you only really need images insofar as they support or visualize the offer being made that supports the business goal. So like if you're, this metal band and you send out like a free swag kit to anyone who signs up via email and address on your website, and you send them like pins and like patches and stickers, then like having a fan like using all those things in an image could be cool,
right?
Because it supports the offer.
Yeah.
But like just an image of a bunch of your fans doesn't help.
Right. Well, and like even the way that some images on Indiepreneur.io look, right? Like they have the color overlays of our brand colors, right? Which is mostly the orange color. But they are tiled and tiny, right? So I know that, there's a few artists I've seen who will take pictures of their fans in the merch, right? And make kind of a tiled little mosaic of them with a color overlay so that first off, it kind of makes all the photos match, right? If there's multiple photos. And when it's kind of this mosaic, it looks like it's meant to be art versus like, look, it's a picture, look at this photo of my fan.
Yeah. It's like a texture or a gradient for your website. Exactly.
Yeah. So it has more of a creative vibe to it, but it's still kind of supporting, like Cirque said, the thing that you're trying to get them to do.
Totally. And lastly, I'll say about above the fold, because like there's not much to say here. Just like don't put any images that don't support the offer. Don't not put an offer.
Right.
Don't put social links there. And lastly, don't put video backgrounds in it, because
I like video backgrounds.
I know, but don't do it, because here's the thing.
But they're pretty.
The average internet capability, they can be, but you have to think about, like, let's say 40% of your traffic is on desktop. That's 40% of your traffic that's seeing a pixelated, takes too long to load, shitty video that is difficult to watch on the back of your most important real estate on your website.
Yeah.
And especially with 4K screens being common now, like that video does not look good. And if it did, it would take forever to load.
Right.
And there's just no way to get around that.
Right.
So I recommend abstaining from them. Having a playable video that supports the offer being made above the fold, however, that's not off limits.
Right. Well, I think too, like something that it's very hard to escape your own personal experience with the way that you use devices and the way that you use the internet and sites and things like that from what everybody else does, right? Which is why a tool that I mentioned last week, which is called Heat Map. The free version is, cool. You can add it to several pages and you can see like where most of the people hover, where they click, right? It kind of gauges mobile traffic versus desktop traffic. Like for me, the reason why I'm so partial to video backgrounds is because, well, first off, it's easier to make a video look cool in just like in the background of something than it is to make a photo for me, because like my videos, just until just recently when Cirque was like, here's a camera now, like make good videos. Up until recently, video was always like, my thing that I didn't know how to do. And so like video backgrounds were always great for me because they were like built in and I could put like some overlays on it. And I didn't, at that point, I'm like, okay, technically my site has video on it. I don't have to like put other videos here. And it was kind of a cop out for me, whereas I've like edited.
I put a video background on Studio 18's website when I built it in like 2014, and it ruined page load
Yeah.
time because it was on Squarespace, and Squarespace is already terrible with that. And then you add a video background and it's over.
Squarespace just doesn't tell you to compress it. That's the problem. Because Squarespace can load.
It was compressed all right. It looked awful.
Well, that could be a problem as well, depending on what you have your load settings. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there was a point where I'm like, oh, look, I can make something look fancier because it's video, but it's in the background, so it doesn't have to be that good. Right. And now my site looks like fly because of this video background. And I think it's to the, it doesn't speak, again, it doesn't speak to the point of doing things purposefully, right? And this is totally different from when we're talking about running an album launch and people are engaging with, here's a video describing why you should sign up for my, album launch or whatever. Like, I think that's kind of different. We're talking about video backgrounds on just your general site. And I am on my computer kind of like a ridiculous number of hours a day. Like, I'm probably only off my computer, besides when I'm sleeping or showering or eating, like maybe a couple to a few hours a day. Otherwise, I'm constantly in front of my desktop. So, when I'm looking at analytics, though, of especially some of our bigger clients who are, whether we're talking about a YouTube sensation, or we're talking about a musician, or we're talking about, ad delivery, we're looking at like 80 and 90% mobile traffic and engagement. And so even though that's not how I engage, and that's kind of my point, even if that's not how I engage with brands, you have to like kind of take your head out of the way you use the internet and just know that like mobile is where it's at, which means you have to care more about load time and care about the fact that videos don't look great on these things, like they just aren't, it's not meant for that. So yeah, you have to fight some of the things in you though. And I know that feeling.
Yeah. And then I would say that kind of rounds out the above the fold issues. Beyond that, it's improper pixeling. It's, not having a pixel in important places. Like, you can strategically not have a pixel in some places in your website if you're tracking with other means, you're tracking with Google Tag Manager or whatever. Like, I understand that some places don't need to be pixeled, but not pixeling important conversion focused pages, which your homepage should really be. Right. That's kind of, you that's not excusable in 2019. So if you've got a Facebook business account, you need to be setting up the pixel, and it's not that hard. There's step-by-step instructions that we offer that are offered, on blog articles all across the internet. It's just take care of it if that's not the case.
Right.
And then beyond that, once you start scrolling down the homepage, I think a lot of the issues we see have to do with the primacy of different elements. So if someone's scrolling, it's really easy to work out the psychology in a website where pretty much everything's perfect, because it's like, if there's an offer on the above the fold and it's clear and it's concise, the only reason someone scrolls after that is if they are looking for the menu to go consume content. And that I like the upside down homepage idea where you have the menu at the bottom and they can scroll all the way there. Footers are usually menus anyways, sitemaps. Right. So that all checks out. But the only other reason someone's scrolling is because they need more info in order to take the offer. And that's where you put it, is below the fold. Now, one thing people probably aren't...
Or if they've already taken the offer.
Right. Yeah. Well, in that case, I think they're looking for the menu. They're looking for site navigation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Or something else. Yeah,
well,
they want more. Yeah, I gotcha.
One thing I don't think they're looking for is your Spotify, right? Like, they probably already have that put together.
For sure.
They're not... Yeah. First of all, they might not have Spotify. And if they don't, if they're on your website, chances are, like, either they just saw you on YouTube, right, or Facebook, and now they somehow ended up on your website, and they can just search you on Spotify. They're in the active phase of looking for you. You can have Spotify links in your footer. You can have Spotify links way down there. But having an embedded Spotify player on your website is, like... I've built websites like that, but it's just not a good idea. Right. I don't think.
Yeah.
Personally.
The only thing I tend to, and it's almost like we just use it because like Spotify developers made it available. And so we're like, yeah, that's tight. You know, I'm convinced I'll do it, you know?
It's very difficult to make it look good.
Oh, dude, it's terrible. And it's not responsive. And I mean, yeah, I can't say that I've used that. Now, again, you know, I don't have data on who uses that differently from whether or not I use it. But when I have run heat map on this stuff, I definitely don't see people engaging with that widget. If anything, they engage with, you know, the Spotify follow button, which is usually like super small and down at the very bottom of a page or whatever. And those things are kind of like, they're so auxiliary, right? It's definitely not something that should take up a section of your site, you know? But for the most part, I just don't see data or evidence or any kind of, you know, case studies that prove otherwise that people engage with that player. I think too, like it's, you know, and whatever you want to think about Spotify, right? Obviously, we have our issues with Spotify due to just data tracking in general, as well as like the fact that they don't want to pay songwriters as much, and they've got all these fake, you know, fake artists who are garnering all these streams, and like all of that said, like it's pretty much like a banner ad for a different service, right? And the people who are like buying your music from iTunes, because that does still technically exist, even though they've kind of phased it out, it's still there. Or if they listen to you on Apple Music, which pays like twice, if not more, what Spotify pays, now you're like kind of convincing a generation, right? Your fans anyway, to use Spotify, which is kind of a crappy service for a lot of people, especially for songwriters and artists, you know, for paying royalties, so to speak, you know? So I just think it's funny that it's like wearing an Abercrombie hoodie, right? Like, why are you advertising? Like, why are you paying $70 to advertise for Abercrombie? It's essentially what you're doing with your Spotify player.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't think it's necessary to have like any player on your website because like if people wanted that, they'd go to their streaming service of choice. I assume the likelihood that like a bulk of your traffic is going there to figure out where to stream you, I don't think that's high. People, I mean, the behavior to me seems to be discover an artist, search them on your favorite streaming platform.
Yeah,
that's what it appears to be.
Yeah.
So these are all hierarchy issues, right? That like button primacy, offer primacy. These are all things that should go into your homepage and every page. One of the reasons I really like Bruno Mars' webpage when I audited it, his website, was because every page had offer primacy. It was looking for subscribers and customers. It wasn't looking for Spotify streams, you know?
Right.
And that was super encouraging. To see like that kind of web design with a marketing focus going on at the highest levels.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that's something, you know, it's too bad that we don't find more of those, right? More of these artist sites. We're like, oh, what a pleasant surprise. Like it happens so infrequently. And I think that's one reason why of all the series that kind of stopped, you know, that weren't the highest priority on Full Stack Creative, it's because it was like, this is almost repetitive. Like, what else can we say about this? You know, like, yep, this artist site is bad. Oh, there's too many pixels, or oh, their events aren't firing, or the design sucks. And it's like, end of the story. Like, it just was so frequent, you know? So, I mean, I think that's something that, you know, I wish we had more examples, I guess. And we do have more examples, but I wish that we had a plethora of examples to kind of show, like, you know, the function of a site versus the vanity project of a site.
Yeah, and I think everything else besides that, like I really wanted to hammer home offer and ability to claim offer and prioritizing offers and really thinking about every element on your website as a component of some kind of offer and making sure that's the right one. And it all coalesces around the same one. And the rest is just visual issues. It has to do with visual hierarchy. So we see a lot, and this is something indie websites are guilty of, but also major label artists. Like, you know, a consistency of color and branding elements. Going into a website with an idea of a color palette and sticking to it and having clearly defined rules, like borders are this color. There are only borders on these types of elements. Fonts are this size or this size. Having like a bajillion different font sizes throughout your website is not very helpful
Right.
in terms of like setting user expectations and giving them a pleasant thing to look at. Having dark fonts on dark backgrounds, and like we see a lot of that with indie websites, but also like with majors, we see fonts that are difficult to read overlaid on images that are pixelated. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
you just can't read it because there's an image behind it, and the image isn't even good or supportive of what, the website is for.
Right. I think like when I see a lot of different fonts, like basically if I see more than like a font that is for headings and menu items, like that's cool. And then there's another one for like smaller text, which actually like I'm probably not going to read a lot of smaller text. Like smaller text is on an artist site is kind of pointless. Like your bio, like you don't want that on your site anyway. So like you don't need a smaller font for that. But like if you have a ton of different fonts, it's almost like talking to people in a different accent. Like when you say different things. So like you have your regular accent and then you like turn Texan for part of it and then you sound English for part of it. Like that's kind of in the brain. Like if someone walked up to you and did that, that would be like, that's weird. And to me, that's how fonts strike me on sites when there's like a million of them. I'm kind of like, whoa, who's speaking to me now? What is this experience I'm having, So yeah, definitely like, and that's one of those things where like, your fans and your friends and your family are like, obviously your loudest fans. And sometimes they're a little too helpful, but something that they can definitely do is tell you if they can't read your site, and that way you don't have to ask people that you don't know to look at it, Also, if you're a pro member, post in the indies group and be like, hey guys, is this hard to read? Because sometimes we don't realize that because we know what it says, it's fine. Like we can read it fine, but that's because we wrote it,
Right.
And so asking some people who don't know that stuff that you wrote is, it can be pretty important.
So yeah, like big images, blocky intersections between parts of the page where you have like maybe one big flat color, like a gray that's dull, and then it's intersecting with like a red that's dark. And it's just like, it looks bad.
Oh, man.
And you know what I mean? So like, if anything else, if you find yourself not being terribly good at design, which is fine, like some of us our intelligence doesn't lie in design, it lies somewhere else, and that's totally okay. But if that's you need to take an approach of additive rather than subtractive. So you need to just start off with one single flat color and one single font in one single size and see how much of your website you can make with just that.
Right.
Don't do images and like section background images and all this crazy stuff. Like just start with this like additive from zero perspective, and you'll probably make something that looks really cool and minimalist rather than like a big blocky mess.
Right. Yeah, because I don't want a big blocky mess. So let's try not to do that.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, it's one of those things too. I see that on sites all the time. And I'm just like, man, like I want to send it to Cirque for who did this every time. Cause I'm like, who thought this was legible? Like, to be honest, man, even that Bruno Mars site that you did like a good review on, I was like, this video background is crazy. Like it was, I mean, it definitely was compressed enough for it to still load reasonably. Sometimes I can't tell because I have like 300 megabyte download speed. So sometimes I can't tell when sites are really bandwidth heavy. But that video backdrop was like, okay, but it almost was so unapologetic in it that it smacked me in the face and I still had an offer pop up in front of me the instant I got on the page, so like that almost made it like, okay.
That was one of the biggest marks against that. Like that website would have been perfect if they just didn't do that.
Yeah. But that's like, I mean, and when you're talking about artists who are promoting, music videos that cost them $60K, $100K, whatever to make, it's like, all right, well, you're probably proud of that. So fine. You know what I mean? But hopefully there's no indies who are spending that much on a music video. If you are, you should probably spend it on ads instead. But there shouldn't really be a need for that. But I think too, like, it's just, I would love to see, like, maybe at some point we should do some audits of like, here's a good example of a color scheme, and even showing some adventurous examples and identifying why they work, and I'm sure actually our brand master, Casey, would have some insight into that as well. But there's certain colors that just do not work. Like, even if you only have like gray and red as your colors, that's not going to work. Like, it doesn't matter if those are the only two colors and you only have one font. If it's dark gray and red, like GarageBand style, like, that's not going to be super legible,
right.
So there's some that are just like a no-go, and you're not going to know until you ask people whose eyes aren't yours.
Yeah. I think like you can definitely do a lot better. And like every artist website that we see that's not particularly anything to write home about, like, I think they could be a lot better if you started from zero and just very, very sparsely added features to it. Website developers think of things as features and fixes of the website. So you're either building a feature or you're fixing a broken feature. And like, if your list of features that your website absolutely needs to have as an artist is particularly huge, like, you need to boil that down. Like, do you need all these videos that you're showing on this website? Do people need to know about all these individual things? What is someone supposed to get out of your website in terms of the primary goal? What should they understand you're trying to do? And that should be to bring them deeper into the relationship. If the video serves that, that's great. But a whole row of video gallery is probably not going to serve that. They can get that elsewhere. What is your website needed?
Well, I think and that's one thing, like, if you are like, okay, great, my website sucks, so now what? Like, something that I do with a lot of indies, especially like in our founders, which I know I'm talking about because they're my favorites. But what they're doing on some of their stuff is like, depending on where they are in like the majority of where their fans lie, right? So we have some who are like total beginners. We have some who are kind of in the middle, who have made some sales but haven't like made a bulk of their first sales. And then we have people who have made their first sales, but now they need to take people to the next level. And for each of these kind of categories of people, I'm like, okay, so your homepage needs to be essentially like, what, if we've got somebody who's in ascension, right, where they've got a lot of fans, who they're trying to get into ascension. I'm like, okay, so let's make sure that your website is doing kind of this upside down homepage thing, right? Where it's like the thing at the top is, like the lower level of the buddy system. And then, so you could do like, okay, above the fold is an opt-in for an experience. In theory, if a fan knows me and has already been through that process, then they'll scroll down to the next one where it's affirmation and there's like some merch items for sale or some kind of special offer for merch where there, or, even tour dates, which can be kind of affirmation, kind of ascension, depending on how much people love going to your live show. It does take a little more for people to go to a live show because they have to leave the house and, that's hard. So maybe that's an ascension thing for you. And then if you are even past that, then maybe you have a membership site, right? Or God forbid, a Patreon, same diff though for some people. So, and that would be lower down the page. And so essentially like it's information about all the things that you're currently offering in your buddy system. Like start there. Start there with your like, if you have a super long homepage, right, with multiple sections, do that first and then see what that looks like to you, right? And get a kind of vibe from that. Because I think that what that allows you to do is kind of work through the angsty process of figuring out what your site layout should look like, first create a bunch of offers that could look good on your site and could serve the purpose of deepening your fans' relationship. From there, then move them around, then add some things, right? But see what that looks like. And I think that that's kind of a, a working, kind of like a working assignment, right? Where you nail out some of the less fun work so that you can do some design and be creative and do things past that around these things that you've built that are really what your website's there for.
Yeah, I think if you have listened to this episode fully, you kind of understand some things about what someone should see when your website first loads, whether your header is really even that necessary, what to remove, all these big images, things that take a long time to load, things that don't facilitate the primary goal of your website, which like primary and secondary. Tertiary, that should be on another page, right? Like
right.
If there's a third purpose of your website, it should not be on a majority of the pages. It should be specialized. And I think like these tips, you can rack them up and kind of audit your own website and be like, okay, is there enough here where I can change some things? Enough here that I'm doing right where I can just change a few things and it'll be good? Or should I start from square one? And if you should start from square one, I want you to know, like, don't be worried about that, because literally a single page with an offer and an opt-in and a footer, like that's honestly a lot better than many artist websites that I've seen, including major label artists.
For sure. Yeah, I totally agree.
With that said, I think we've fully gone over in the last episode what we think a great artist website needs in terms of features and functionality that you can put on it. In this episode, we've kind of done a little bit of tearing down of what it doesn't need and what needs to go. And I think now we're at a good place to, in the next episode, really start talking about, making a great artist website and building it.
Definitely.
So that's definitely coming for the rest of Artist Website Month.
Dude, I'm super stoked on it. I think that that's something that, your website is supposed to, think about why the internet exists, right? Which it could be a million things, right? What is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of the internet? But more specifically, what is the meaning of your website? Yeah. And I think the meaning of your website is to have a 24-hour presence for you that is doing something for you when you're not there, when you're not available, when you're not advertising, when you're not posting, when you're not chatting with fans, when you're not playing or touring, right? Like the site should be doing the things for you. And if you think about all these things that you could be doing, instead of worrying about aesthetics and, all of the mess of design and stuff, and first think about just what that presence should be doing in your absence, right? I think you'll be on your way to getting to this stuff we're going to talk about next week. But that'll give everybody, if they wanted to start now, a little bit of homework to dig into. I'm in homework mode because that's what I do for Founder. They get assignments every week. So I'm like, here's the teaching moment. Get a little bit of preview for next week.
Yeah. So we will see the rest of you indies next week to talk about actually putting together a dope artist website.
Yeah.
Awesome.